Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude Mystic, and welcome to today's very special report entitled Silver When the Banks Fail with none other than David Morgan. He is the author of the Silver Manifesto, and you can find his work on the morganreport.com. Mr. Morgan, David, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Jean-Claude, I'm very good. Thank you very much.
Happy to have you on, and thank you so much for everyone for joining us here on the Rumble feed. We are triple casting today on Twitter, YouTube, and also Rumble. And if you guys have been following the Rumble feed in the last couple of days, they have been having some issues. David, I think ever since they launched this January 6th footage channel there, I think it was Thursday or Friday, they've been having some intermittent issues. So if you don't see us there, please move over to either Twitter or YouTube. And of course, the video will be available after the show as well. Dave, we got a lot to go through today, man. I saw your interview on USA Watchdog. Great job the other day here with Greg Hunter, and it kind of reminded me. You were saying a few things that were similar to the discussion I had last week with Bill Holter, Bix Weir, and Andy Scheckman on the video entitled "When the Banks Fail." And I got a little bit of flack for that because we seem to be saying things that are contrary to what we're hearing in the mainstream news. And I know that your latest report, also on the Morgan Report, kind of get some flack also because again you're looking at some real hardcore data here, and it seems to be very contrarian to the mainstream news. Can you give us, maybe before we start here, the first couple of highlights of what you're looking at right now, what you think is important for the audience to look at right now in terms of um, keeping an eye out for this radar here of this economic system, financial system here going down, what's happening with the dollar, and what they need to know here to navigate through perhaps the next couple of weeks and months here, even though the mainstream news seems to be hard at work painting a very rosy picture of the economic situation. David.
Yeah, boy, I wish I had better news. Point number one that I have, harped on for some time, and that is that most banks around the world, not all, that if you are a depositor, you are considered an unsecured creditor, which in simple English means if you have a deposit in the bank, it's not your deposit.
Right.
Technically, at law, you have loaned that money which you had to them. And if something blows up as an unsecured creditor, they can issue shares in the bank. And that has happened. And when it has happened, once you're able to sell those shares, so far, you get about 5 cents on the dollar. So it's not a position you want to be in. And of course, the other thing is the bank failures that we have, it's systemic, which means they're all inextricably connected to each other. So if one goes, they all go. That's an exaggeration. But
Right.
if some of these major banks go, and they're of course too big to fail, but some of the lesser banks start to fail, they could take a lot of banks down with them. The
Mm-hmm.
other point, which I've really been starting to harp on, which is even perhaps even scarier than your bank account not being your own money and maybe not being able to access it, is something that Bix Weir brought to the fore some time ago, and let's say it's being recycled through more detail than Bix, and no offense, Bix, but it's the Great Taking. And this David Weber has put together, it's all for free. Just go to thegreattaking.com and you'll see a movie trailer. You'll see the full feature movie, an audio book for free, and the PDF for free. You can't get a hard copy if you want to spend the money.
Right.
But what it says and what he verifies is that, as Bix had said, you don't even own your stocks or bonds. So if you don't own your bank account and you're going to mitigate your exposure to the system by owning some mining shares, for example, or maybe some, I don't know, a good solid food producer or something, and you feel secure because you have a segregated account, you own the stock certificate, think again, you
Mm-hmm.
don't. You're a
Mm-hmm.
beneficiary. And in the event of a collapse, the the banks, and they're actually called, they're not called privileged, they're called protected. Protected banks actually own it. So the analogy that David Webb gives in this movie is like a monopoly game where we're all playing the game and we've got our houses and our hotels and we've got our utilities, we've got our stocks, we're collecting rent and everything's wonderful. And then the game ends and the bank collects everything off the board, puts it in the box, and starts the whole game over where you have zero and they have everything. And that's a pretty accurate analogy. Now, David Webb does go on in the movie that and it's implied that if you have fully paid for real estate, you're probably okay as long as you keep paying the property taxes. Because even
Right.
when you have clear title to a piece of land or improved property,
Oh,
um,
very few people have allodial title. Maybe there's a
yeah,
few elite people
exactly.
who do, but the rest of us don't. No, you're
Yeah,
right.
right. So
Right.
as long as you're paying your homage to the landlord, which is the government in most cases, you're allowed to own your own property that's been bought and paid for a year, a generation, 2 generations, whatever it may be. So it
Right.
really is very, very upsetting. How can you mitigate it? And of course, the answer is gold and silver. Is that the only thing? No, it isn't. But and the idea that David, you've been saying this for years. Yes. Have I said it this harshly for years? No. I haven't really been as fearful as I've been the last, I'd say 3 or 4 months. I mean, I'm pretty close to cliff high. I mean, we've talked on the phone several times, and I forget the exact date. I think you're talked to him a little more often than me, but he came up with this idea that was a big event. I don't want to mischaracterize it. You might help me out, coming in whatever near future. And it was so big that would have put out some of the other, let's say, anomalies, for a polite word, that have taken place here recently. It put that to shame. In other words, it was like a factor. I think he even said an order of magnitude bigger or worse. And again, I'm not trying to play the fear card. All I'm trying to do really is give you the facts and let you make up your own damn mind about how far you want to take it. And you don't have to take it real far to mitigate the problem. I mean, if you've got food, water, a strong community, some precious metals, you're probably in pretty good shape. But if you are highly leveraged in real estate because inflation is going to bail you out, you might want to rethink that.
Well, thank you for that. Let me just bring this up to. We'll get into some of the WebBot data for Cliff High as well to shore up some of the information there. But I just wanted to go back at this very quickly. People might think about this. Oh, JC, we've seen these kind of movies before. There's a lot of stuff about the end of the financial markets, yada yada yada. What's interesting about the Great Taking, and please add to this also, is that they're describing not just hypotheses or opinions. They're going with laws that are already on the books. We're talking about bail-in legislation. We have that here in Canada since 2012. Most people are not aware of that. They get into depositors being unsecured creditors, really. Like all of these definitions and all these laws, in many of the cases here, to sum up the Great Awakening, are already on the books. It's been planned, it's been prepared. Now, whether or not we get to the point of um, initiating this particular scenario as it's being played out, we can debate that all day. Is that tomorrow? Is that in 3 years from now or 5 years? But the point is, the legislation is already there. Speak about that. Maybe give a few examples to the audience members here who haven't seen or haven't read the book. Why maybe they should pay attention a little bit more here than just this being hyperbole or tinfoil hatters having their conspiracy theory parties here. What do you say is the takeaway from the Great Taking?
Well, this is my opinion. So, maybe David Webb will call me up and say, wait a minute, Mr. Morgan, you missed it. But, there's no guarantee that this will take place.
Mhm.
However, as you said, everything has been aligned for like 50 years, is his exact quote. It's taken about 50 years to get to this point. And it's been tried at law. And so precedence has been set already. So
Mhm.
those things ought to send a bit of a shiver down your spine. And
Mhm.
then on top of that, I think one thing that I am a bit remiss, Jean-Claude, and that is stating this. I'm not sure that the banks really have control. I mean, many of us say, hey, the reset, and they're going to have a central bank digital currency, and they've got the Fed now, and they've tested it since November, and they got this ISO 2022, whatever it is, and all these things that have been sitting in place. This is a bunch of our authority figures writing things down on a piece of paper and codifying it into a law. And I have to go, Mr. Bachier, Frenchman that wrote the book, The Law, which basically, when all these laws are subjugated to where we lose and they win, you're near the end. Anyway, let me get back and not digress any further. So these are the distinct possibilities. And David Webb is probably more, I won't say enough of an alarmist, I think he's at least as concerned, if not more so, than I am. He's implied that this is not very far away. And they do need to reset. I mean, all the bankers in the world know that the system is failing as we speak.
Right.
It's just how does it come up back? And according to this website, if you look at it, read it, study it, the way it comes back is they put everything into one place and they restart the system. Now, the analogy it gives is very, very important because it's easy for everyone to understand. In the 1930s, Roosevelt closed all the banks. So, how did all these rich people that had, maybe a farm and maybe two houses and they might have had a business go broke? Well, they closed all the banks. That means all. Now, who opened? Oh, the Federal Reserve banks. Again, the privileged class.
Yeah.
So if you were at the Farmers and Merchant Bank in Manitoba and you had your land paid for or whatever, and all of a sudden that bank doesn't come back, but the Federal Reserve Bank, I know there's not the Federal Reserve of Canada, but using it as a what if, is the only bank that's left to come back and you don't have a deposit there, guess what? You are SOL.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what took place in the 30s. So it brings that to the fore so everyone can understand very simply that in a all-out systemic failure to reset the system, and maybe there's more animals that are created more equal than others, and some of the more equal animals are made whole, but the rest of us are left out in the dark. And I don't want to scare anybody again. I don't want to have to apologize every other sentence either, but I also want people to know that, your best financial planner is you. Your best understanding of the system is you. And if you want to poke holes in anything I'm saying, please do. If I've made an error, let me know. But I am a pretty good student of the financial markets and have been so my whole life. And I always try to mitigate it, Jean-Claude, on the, I wouldn't say a rosy scenario, but being accurate. I don't want to have to embellish anything because the true facts are scary enough.
Absolutely.
So why embellish them, right?
Let me put a few of the true facts on the screen here. So these were some of the news items that Jeannie and I were reporting on in the last Crypto Woo forecast here for the month of December. Just to paint the picture here, which is not being represented very clearly on the 6 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news. But if you go there and do your research, you'll find that there's a lot of pieces that are tying together in the background. So this was Alistair McLeod saying, buckle up, the Federal Reserve is about to prepare to unleash QE to infinity, quantitative easing. We're talking about this pivot point for the Fed. Bill Holter here was talking about confetti dollars. You've talked about this on the Greg Hunter show, where the value of the dollar has almost disappeared here since 1913. We're talking about the servicing of the debt scenario now, how expensive it is to do that. We're talking about here, Egon von Gries is talking about us witnessing the end of the currency here. And all through history, every currency has gone to zero, every single one of them. The US one is not singular in that fact. When you look again at its purchasing power, we're getting close to it, realizing that zero potential now. And if you look at some of Cliff High's Webbot data reports, he's suggesting that this hyperinflation scenario and this crack up boom here could be as soon as January, February of 2024. So we're getting into some of those critical moments. Now we're seeing the disappearance also here of the middle class. That's been evident here for everyone to see, especially now during COVID. That's a whole other topic for another show. We're still on YouTube, David, so we'll tread carefully on that one. But this is interesting too here. Part of the people watching the show, or maybe some of the new people watching the show, will say, "Oh, I kind of listened to Dave and JC a couple of years ago, and they were saying the same thing. Why is it different now, JC?" That's probably some of the question that people are watching are having. Well, what's different now too, we're seeing a huge stress at the banking level. So we're seeing the cracks there. This is one example here, 64 US banks branches to shut down here very soon. And this was tied into all of these glitches in the last couple of weeks here too, where deposits had been delayed. And so clearly there's a stress there. We can talk about the repo market also, Dave, and we could talk about the interbank lending rate, which is also suggesting that even the banks right now are front running something that's around the corner, and they're afraid to lend to each other. We'll get to that in a second, but let me finish this too. Fed bailout program also, the borrowing surging in November, again, suggesting that the banking sector is in trouble. And here in Canada, TD, CIBC, Scotiabank, everybody's having some issues here. But here in China, this particular one, financial contingent warning by HSBC, told here to brace for a catastrophic $6.3 billion hit. So we're seeing that all things are not normal. And finally, we have this idea of all these unrealized losses at the banking level. I kind of touch upon this in my last interview with Bill Holter, but can you share your understanding here of the stress that we see on the chart right now, how that's resulting in the issues we're seeing in the bank, the interbank lending rate, perhaps even the repo market, and what people need to know here about this fight that's happening right now between the regional banks and perhaps the preferred banks that are setting up the scenario here for the great taking. Dave, I know that's a lot. It's a huge setup there, but let's try to unmuddy the waters there for the audience.
Yeah, well, let's unpack it. It's actually pretty easy because what most people maybe don't understand or do understand is that this overnight lending, it's like, well, why is this overnight lending such a big deal? And the answer is that the Federal Reserve, the kingpin of the central banks in the United States, and you could argue maybe worldwide, has a requirement that you have to have so many reserves on the books every night. When you close your day, you have to have a certain reserve requirement. Now, at times, you go back to the old days, people learned it was like a 10 to 1. In other words, in fractional reserve banking, the rule of thumb way back when, a long time ago, that for every dollar that you had loaned out, you had to have 10 cents on it. Well, those days are long gone. In fact, we've been in areas in the not too recent past where there wasn't any reserve. Now there is again. So if I'm Bank A and I don't have enough reserves, what I do to square my books that night is I take some of my treasury bills, notes, or bonds, I pledge them as collateral for cash. I get that cash and I deposit it into my bank, and now I have met reserve requirements. And this happens every frickin' night. Now, as you can see from that graph, it's harder and harder to get the reserves needed because there's less and less cash available because so much of the cash has moved out of the deposits that the banks are required to keep and into money markets. So now, if all of those deposits, say all but a lion's share, a vast majority of those deposits have left the bank as deposits and they're now sitting in T bills or money market funds, now those banks still have to meet their reserve requirements, which means there's a greater need for what's called ready cash, overnight cash. Well, I've got a lot of bonds, but how much cash is available? Well, there isn't much in that bank or that bank or that bank or that bank. They're all sitting in money market deposits. So what do I do? Well, you do the best you can. That's why that curve goes so strongly to the downside as it shows, because the liquidity is drying up in the banking system.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that the liquidity isn't there in the money market system, but in the banking system, it's horrible. Look at how big that is. So the amount of liquidity into the banking system is what makes it go. In other words, without that reserve of some type, then you've got the bigger problem of a bank run happening quite easily. Let me explain that. In normal circumstances where everything's copacetic and normal life and everybody's happy and they don't understand anything about fractional reserve banking, it only takes about 5% of the depositors to come to the bank and say, I want all of my money out of the bank. And that will collapse it because the fractional reserve is at such a high level. But that's never, I should say, never, seldom happens. But now, with the predicament that the banks are in because of higher interest rates, instead of being 5% toppling the banks, it might be 1% or a half a percent because the reserves are not being met as easily because they have to keep borrowing money overnight to meet the reserve requirements. So, what do? Well, you start deflating the money supply, and the velocity of money goes like in the 30s to zero. I mean, zero means no money movement at all. It's not that low, but it's quite low. because people are,
If you were to track the M2 money supply, the reduction, the curve that we're on now versus what led up to the 1930s, do you see similarities there? Do you see that
we
same
could
setup?
go into a debt liquidating depression. I know everyone thinks hyperinflation. I mean, we've had a hyperinflation. It's just been over such a long period of time, no one sees it for that.
Right.
If you took my grandfather and woke him up, I mean, he's been deceased a long time, but if you woke him up and you said, hey, a car costs what an apartment building used to cost in downtown San Francisco, he wouldn't believe you. I mean, that would be a hyperinflation to him. But
Right.
since it's taken 120 something years, it's been, let's say, adjusted to.
Right.
But now that it's accelerating, so you could have a hyperinflationary crash of the currency and at the same time a devaluation in the amount of assets that are backed by currency. In other words, the money supply could contract because the bonds to become cash have to be discounted at such a huge rate. So if everybody had to go to cash, for example, let's say a hypothetical, everything's sold, just like in a movie rollover. So
Hmm.
all bonds, all stocks, everything's sold. Everything has to go to cash. So the value of a stock certificate drops immensely because no one wants to buy it. They have to scramble for cash as well. So the system has leverage both directions.
Right.
So when you see the money supply contracting in M2, which it has, and the velocity being so low, it's the old expression, deer in the headlights. People with money don't know what to do.
Right.
People that want to borrow can't because they're not credit worthy. And so the whole system starts to freeze up. And this is what Jim Rickards has talked about some time ago about this ICE 9, this Kurt Vonnegut cat's cradle hypothetical idea where this water, this H2O ICE 9 variety, which is all, it's just fiction. But once a couple of drops of this hits, all the water freezes. So that's what happened in 2008, very momentarily. The
Hmm.
banks did not trust each other for their subprime mortgages, and that stopped the liquidity again. And instead of being because of interest rates being higher, it was because that these junk bonds were worthless, and most of the banks knew it, and they didn't want to do any loaning against each other because they knew these things were dog doo doo.
Hmm.
So the Fed came in and said, well, here, we need to take care of this. Give me your dog doo doo. I'll pay you full face value for it. And they flooded the market with treasuries. But now we've got a problem with treasuries because the treasuries are not worth, they're not dog doo doo, although the 30-year might be considered
Some
that
would argue, yes.
because no one's going to get back anything close to the purchasing power 30 years from now
Hmm.
from what you would get today, which is about 2 cents of what it was worth in 1913.
Yeah.
But I digress. So we've got a real problem, and the bankers know it. So now how do you reset? And the answer is, I don't think they know. This backstop that they've made with this, the great taking that David Webb really illustrates quite well, hasn't, in his view and in mine, been thought through all the way because
Hmm.
this would wipe out billionaires. I
Yeah.
mean, this would basically wipe out everyone except a very, very few banks. And now they have all the assets. And so what do you do with it? Now, as he points out, and I love to point out, and I
And
really
you
want
have
to
to
do
add
this.
there too. Hold on a second. You
Yeah,
have to add it would wipe up everyone except those who are holding in physical in their own possession.
right. And
That's
the other part is the physical economy. And I was taught this very early on, and it kind of gave
right.
me a sense of relief. And that is in a true all out 100% financial collapse, what happens? Well, listen, all the schools are there, all the churches are there, all the wheat fields are there, all the oil fields are there,
Hmm.
all the labor's ability is there, all the grocery stores are there. So basically, in a financial collapse, the physical economy basically stays in place. The problem is that there's a mitigation of who has ownership to it.
Yeah.
And that's what this DTCC, CD and Company, and Great Taking's all about. Who gets to start the game over?
Right.
We the people? Well, damn well, I hope so.
Yeah.
Or these bastard bankers that have held us in captive, since the Babylonian days, basically.
Yeah.
Back to you.
That is the fight that we're fighting now. Thank you. That's a bigger topic, and you're getting into the woo of a lot of our shows. We're in that moment now, critical for humanity. And I think that doing these shows, exposing people to new information, even this whole conversation about the Elohim, how the financial system might be tied to them as well for control matrix, really at least should have people thinking about, okay, if they're going to make us feel pain here in order to funnel us through this new system, we might be able to have at least a moment to step back and say, aha, wait a second, I got you. I don't want to play that game anymore. So we have, but again, that means that, or that requires that we share a lot of this information and we wake up more of the population as to what's happening with the financial markets. Let me just bring you back to this question of hoarding. So the banks are having issues. They don't want to lend to each other. They're using these overnight windows here with the Feds also to shore up their reserve requirement ratios. But something seems to be happening on the ground level as well. Let me bring up this particular item. The U.S. government prints almost $1 trillion of these $50 bills here as Americans begin hoarding physical cash. This report here was on December 2nd. How does that tie in? Is that just the regular people realizing here they can't really put their finger on it like you've just so eloquently done? They may not have watched The Great Taking, but they know fundamentally something's wrong here and they're saying, I'm taking my chips off the poker table here. Is that what's happening here, Dave? Expand on that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I won't take any credit. I mean, I might take some, but Catherine Austin Fitz has got Cash Fridays, and now I think it's Cash every day.
Yeah.
Cliff Highs talked about it. So the way to mitigate the problem is to go to an anonymous source, which is a bank note, and no one can trace it or track it. And also, it's a tangible asset. Yeah, I'm not for fiat, but it beats the heck out of having a digital representation.
Mm-hmm.
So if your bank balance is $5,000 and you have 4,900 in physical notes and 100 in digital, you're pretty well off because you have got a physical representation of what people consider to be money. And so more and more people are actually waking up to that. Not only does it protect your privacy, but it also mitigates a bank run or a bank failure or a closure of your bank or a bail in or any of these things. So I think it's a good feedback loop showing that more and more people are saying, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. It's like the idea of storing food.
Mm-hmm.
It's a no lose game. The worst thing that can happen is you save money on your food bill and you have to eat it. And if you
Yeah.
don't like what you bought, then give it away to a food bank. It's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing here, having cash outside of the system, in your possession. If there is a bank closure for a couple of days, you're much better off because cash should, most likely would work for fill in the blank, a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. I doubt it'd be 2 years, but it would definitely be accepted for a while. And
Mm-hmm.
even in the unlikely event of a bank run, which is possible, even with these grid downs, I mean, we're seeing more and more problems with the cyber attacks in these grid towns. That's very underreported, just like what's really going on in the banking system. You're not seeing all of the behind the scenes problems like you were expressing on Rumble that's actually taking place. You don't get that on the mainstream news. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, if you can't access the ATM machine, you can't access cash.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you can't access your card reader at the gas station and that's all you have is digits and not physical cash, you can't buy gas.
Right. You just talked about these cyber attacks, and this movie just came out on Netflix. It's number one right now, and all the white hats are talking about it. There's a lot of disclosure there about perhaps some of the scenarios that humans will be facing here very shortly. So I encourage you guys to go watch this. It just came out. I watched it with Sarah on Saturday night, and Janine and I are going to be doing a decode on this tonight on our pay-per-view edition. A fascinating episode. Let's move to the bigger picture. You kind of mentioned oil a little bit earlier today. You were one of the first to report this. At that time, wasn't yet confirmed. It's now since been confirmed here that the UAE has now officially stopped accepting the US dollar here for oil trade. And I remember adding that to the conversation a couple of months ago, just before the BRICS met in July or August, with this idea of introducing this gold-backed trade note. I'm not sure how to call it yet, or currency. It's not a currency yet. Reporters were asking Janet Yellen about it, and she was like, "Oh, because of the sanctions and the war, it's normal that people are going to try to find alternatives, but it's a no biggie, and the U.S. dollar is going to be strong for the foreseeable future, or anyways, words to that effect. I watched the video at the time, and I was kind of flabbergasted at her either lying through her teeth or completely not understanding the situation. So let's go back to how big this event really is and what it means for the remaining 2 cents of the purchasing power here of the US dollar moving forward, David.
Well, it bears repeating, as I said on the Greg Hunter interview, money makes the world go round is really a misnomer. Oil
Mm.
makes the world go round.
Yeah.
I'm not in the adiabatic oil debate. I think we are at peak oil, but even if we're not, we're certainly pushed in that direction.
Yeah.
And I am very aware of the Lost Century by Dr. Stephen Greer about alternative energies.
Yeah.
Not even talking about free energy, just talking about the 200 mile per gallon carburetor and those kind of things that existed.
Yeah.
And these people get snuffed out, or their project gets bought out, or whatever. So I'm very aware that they're all alternatives. I also am very aware of energy makes the world go round, and they have a grip on it that they're not going to let go of. So, regardless of what the truth is regarding how much oil or we have or don't have, it's very clear what direction. So, having said that, if you control the oil, you basically control the world economy.
Hmm.
And the UAE mitigating the dollar, I got one of my members who wasn't upset with me, very polite. My membership, is pretty nice to me. He said, "You're wrong, that it isn't that the UAE is stopping the dollar. It's just they're using local currencies and the dollar." Well, I got to Greg Hunter and reviewed it. I couldn't find anywhere where it said that they're still using the dollar in the UAE, although that could be the case. I couldn't find it.
Right.
But it did say the Saudis are still using the US dollar and local currencies.
Well,
So
for now, but
for
again,
now,
for now, and again, let's put this into perspective. This
right.
guy just died recently, and he was the architect of the petrodollar, at least part of that deal making with the Saudis. We know that the Saudis made a deal with Russia a couple of years ago for their defense. You and I talked about this on the show on the banking crisis, and now we have the situation now developing with the BRICS, where more and more international trade is done outside of the U.S. dollar. How much more legs do we have with the U.S. dollar? Is Janet Yellen telling us that everything's okay and go back to sleep and the dollar is going to remain strong for the foreseeable future? Correct? Or are we going to be contrarians here, Dave? What's your opinion?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I got something rather frightening today from an unsubstantiated source that basically indicated that a revaluation across the board is going to happen within the next couple of months or so, which kind of goes along with the data from Cliff High. Again, I don't want to misrepresent or mischaracterize what Cliff was saying because I'm not absolutely sure, but I think there is something out. I don't think it's out very far.
Mm-hmm.
And a reset can take on a lot of things. Again, one that I'll
Are you
repeat.
talking here reset of currencies, or are you talking about resetting gold and silver here, which kind of is the same conversation?
Yeah,
But
it's the same conversation more or
right.
less. I'm talking resetting currencies.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, basically, if you could counterfeit until you get caught, which is basically what's happened with the United States dollar for decades,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden China says enough of it, Saudi Arabia says enough of it, the United Arab Emirates says, the hell, we're not even going to mess with you guys anymore. We're done. And this starts to become the trend. A trend in motion continues till it actually stops. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'll go to a science fiction movie. It always scared the heck out of me. Forget the name of the movie, or I'd tell you, Jean-Claude, but it was a well-dressed gentleman in an airport, and he's going to the currency exchange window. And the only thing he can exchange that's not accepted is US dollars.
Mm.
How are those apples? I mean, this is something that the reserve currency of the world, and all of a sudden it flip flops upside down. And it's not. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen. Believe
But
me.
just so you know, that's also in some of the older WebBot data reports where American servicemen overseas suddenly are trying to convert their dollars and they cannot get back home. It
I
has something to do with trying to convert the US dollar, and nobody wants it. So
Yeah.
that's, I think that came out in 2016 or 17 in some of the old Alta reports. So interestingly enough, a lot of those data sets that were associated with those sets are happening now. The food riots, the migrant fights on the streets. We're hearing more and more that that's going to be happening here in North America very shortly. If you watch the War Room report just a couple of weeks ago, so we could be in that time frame now. You're not off the mark there, David.
I don't think, just to add to that, I don't think it is too far off the mark. And here's why. If oil is the lifeblood of the world economy and the major oil producers, this, Middle East and Russia, so now you've talked the lion's share of the oil, do not accept US dollars, which I
Mm,
just said Saudi still is, but let's say it goes 2 more months and no one does in the BRICS. Okay.
yeah,
No one. Well, what have you got? Well, are you going to accept their currency for what? If it doesn't buy oil, it isn't really good for anything. That's why the petrodollar was so powerful.
yeah,
If you had to buy oil in dollars, then you basically were saying, the energy ticket. You don't think of it as a currency, you think of it as a slice of energy.
right.
And by the way, I mean, energy is so cheap in oil terms, most people can't comprehend it. I can't remember the exact number, so please forgive me, but I think a barrel of oil is worth something like 500,000 man hours of labor. So if you want to figure out $18 an hour for your labor times 500,000, figure out what a barrel of oil is really worth in terms of human capital, be my guest.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it should sell for that. What I'm trying to point out is cheap oil has given you a huge population increase, the agricultural boom. I know it's GMO. I hate GMO, but
right,
it's done what it's done. It's
right.
accelerated the growth in the world population because energy runs the world. And if it's cheap, you can really ramp it up for a while. And it has
Mhm,
been for about 100
mhm.
years. Now, whether it's by hook or crook, if it's a real truth, adiabatic oil or not, I don't know. I won't argue either one. What we do know is what the powers that want to be are doing with the oil supply. And if they're saying persona non grata for oil is the US dollar, you better start thinking really strong and really hard for what that means day after tomorrow and a week from Tuesday, because it could happen a little sooner than some of us expect.
Yeah. Slowly at first, and then all of a sudden, as the saying goes. Let me go back to the great taking here a little bit. I'm reading some of the comments, and David, we're getting more and more. We're in this period of time that Cliff High calls the splits, where even more people are leaving mainstream news for whatever reason, the egregious lying, the propaganda, the overt propaganda, and they're searching alternative news, and they're getting here, and they're having trouble finding their footing, right? And so I try to go back as I'm moving forward here with these shows to kind of have these conversations again, to create these placeholders to accept these new people and to bring them up to speed. And a lot of the conversation I'm hearing is like, well, JC, even in mainstream news, we've kind of heard this all before. But really, like, the economy is just cyclical. There's booms and busts, and this is normal. It's not the end of the world. The sky is not falling. What do you say to them in the context of what we're just describing now, the petrodollar, the legs of the petrodollar supporting the dollar here dying, the confidence in the US dollar and in the US Army also to some extent, another leg of the support of the dollar dying, when we're seeing all these other countries de-dollarize. And now we're seeing on top of that, all of this legislation as being put forward here in the Great Taking. Are we just looking at a boom bust echo type of scenario, or are we looking at a fundamental change of the way we do economics and treat our financial systems here on the planet? Or are we just looking at regular recessions and depressions and then booms? What are we looking at?
Well, as you know, it's the topic of study basically my whole life. So let's look at both sides of the coin. As I said earlier, the bright side is that all the physical economy stays in place.
Mm,
So, the farms are there, the oil's there, the wheat fields, the labor force, is all there. So, in theory, you could just reboot that and maybe keep things going. Unfortunately, the way the system is set up is it puts the power of money, the money power, I call it, into the hands of very few.
mm,
And so now what happens? Well, if we go to the Great Depression and look at what happened when all those banks closed and they opened up a few, a lot of people that were rich one day were penniless the next. And I think that's a more likely scenario. Not
Yeah.
that the physical economy doesn't stand up and live. It's just how are you going to get somebody to work in the fields if you don't have anything to pay them with? What do you
Mhm.
pay them with? Well, you can pay them with wheat, of course, and they would probably work for a while,
Yeah.
but it's very hard to go back to a barter system.
Yeah.
So if you go back to the 30s, the reason it was mitigated probably in a greater extent than now, and the reason I'm so concerned is that first of all, these events aren't every 50 year where you get some type of a reset. It's more like every 400 years,
Mhm.
where it is such an upheaval that it affects generations. That your children's children will be talking about what happened in 2030.
So that's
Or
this is what I'm getting at here.
that's
You're
what I'm
seeing
saying.
a 400-year shift
You
here, not
bet
a
you
boom
are.
bust echo.
Absolutely. I'm
Okay.
convinced. Doesn't make me right, but it's a
Okay.
very studied opinion. Okay.
Right. 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 Right.
And that means if you go to the 30s and you see, well, like my dad had it pretty well off. Why? Well, they were able to go to their grandfathers who had a farm. Well, it wasn't a farm. I learned later it was a quarter acre. But on a quarter acre, they grew some vegetables and raised rabbits and they ate.
Yeah.
You don't have that available through mainstream America anymore. You did in the 30s. You had a
Mhm.
great agrarian majority still in the 30s. So somebody's uncle or aunt or grandfather, grandmother, or whatever had a plot of land, maybe not a big one like I just outlined, but enough to get by. People don't even know how to do it, even if they have the land in many cases. Some people do, of course, but
Right.
we don't have the ability to mitigate the problem by growing our own food as
Right.
much as we had in the 30s.
Are
People are more
you of the
dependent.
opinion sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, there's a lag there. Are you of the opinion that, as some other researchers are suggesting, that this could be, for those who are prepared and who are playing this right, perhaps their biggest opportunity in their lifetime or the biggest wealth transfer of their lifetime? On one hand, it seems to be happening, if you look at the Great Taking, for very few elite people in the world, but for the people who are informed, can they maybe better their positions throughout this particular transition? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the 30s, there were lots of entrepreneurs, and basically, a lot of the fluff goes away. I mean, like the selfie generation. You're not going to be worried about how good your selfie looks when you're hungry. You're going to be looking for what you can add to your soup to make it more nutritious.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think a lot of the fluff is just going to be blown away. I think you're going to see a lot of the pronoun problem go away. I mean, you're not going to worry about what your pronoun is if you're very hungry. So, a lot of this stuff that that's a very clear indicator we're in the age of decadence, which
Right.
happens right before the collapse, which is
Right.
about where we are. In fact, I think I'm convinced myself that
Yeah.
we've peaked and
Yeah.
we're coming down the curve. But remember, when you throw a ball into the air, it gets all the way up till it statically stays in place for a little bit. Then
Yeah.
it starts to come down slowly, slowly, faster, faster, faster. Then it hits what's called terminal velocity.
Yeah.
We haven't hit terminal velocity yet, but as we like to talk
But
about,
we've seen the pendulum move, like, yeah, Victoria's Secret now dropping the whole woke thing, Disney dropping the whole woke thing. We saw the Bud Light thing this year. So clearly, this whole nonsense at some point, and we get to brass tacks here. So we're slowly but surely we're seeing that pendulum. But in terms of what our real economy and our financial system is going to look like, there's still a lot of obfuscation, and that's the war. That's the war we're fighting. But going back to what you just mentioned, entrepreneurs, like there was a story, I believe it was the Hilton family also, who again went into cash positions or into big silver positions before the Depression, and then they were buying all these hotels at 5 cents on the dollar using their silver, right? So again, those who have physical here are perhaps in a better position here to traverse one system to another. Maybe that's going to repeat itself um, moving forward. Do you think that that scenario also could play out, David?
I think it's likely. I wouldn't say highly likely. It just depends how the new system's structured. Are you going to be able to have private property or not? If these idiots decide that you can't own anything and only they can, then
Right.
what's the point? I mean, it would be more of a Highland scenario where
Right.
we're bartering with real coins out to the farmers in our area.
Right.
I don't know. And I don't think it's going there. I mean, I think we'll be able to muddle through with a new system. I don't know if the great taking is going to actually happen or not. Hopefully, enough of these idiot top level banking megalomaniacs, control freaks will wake up and realize it's not in their best interest because It just isn't. I mean, the way that you get a strong structure, you have diversification.
Yeah.
I mean, if you only had meat to eat as much as I am a carnivore, if that's all you could eat, you get kind of tired of it after a while.
Right.
You know, you don't want a complex system, as Cliff says, anti-fragile.
Yeah.
You want an anti-fragile system, and that means that you have a different skill set than I do, and all that. And the division of labor is very powerful because it allows you to be a very expert at your job, and me to be very expert at my job. And because money is universally accepted, we can all have a better lifestyle. But if you basically suck up all the money and only the privileged class owns it all, then what have you got? You got a mess, you know. And I don't, as David Webb says, I don't think they've thought it through, and I agree with him. If the, you know, I really am concerned, but maybe not overly. You know, it doesn't happen until it does happen.
Right. And that's usually when it's too late to buy your insurance, by the way. You don't buy the insurance after the barn's on fire. Okay. Speaking of insurance, so there's a lot of silver bugs in the chat and a lot of gold bugs, and to some extent some crypto guys as well too. So that's different in this particular scenario. We haven't seen this in past big cycles of change here on the planet. Typically, we go back to precious metals. That's been history repeated over and over again. But this time, we might have another outlet in crypto. So I'll have your take on that last. But let's go move into silver now. We're looking at this particular formation now. To some extent, I'll agree with a lot of researchers who are saying that even this, to some extent, is not reality because somebody has their thumb on the scale in terms of the suppression of silver. What's your take on silver right now? You can add to that some of the fundamentals. You can add to that some of the technical analysis. But where do we go with silver moving forward? You mentioned Cliff High. He's got in this Web data report that ties into all these data sets of this famous $600 prediction of his. I had Marty Hibbs on the other day. He was just doing some regular TA, and he's looking at $35 in the near term. Cliff said probably 50 or 60 in the near term here. That was one of his last emails. Where do you see silver going with all of this? And do you also hear some of the rumors that perhaps China is very close to reevaluating silver for their own economic reasons here? Let's try to unmuddy that for the audience.
Okay, well, the chart you put up is a cup and handle. There's nothing more powerful in a technical formation than a cup and handle formation. And both Marty and Cliff are correct from this aspect. If we see 33 or so next year or sometime, then there's very little resistance to 50.
Right.
So you could go from 33, 34, and it hangs out there for a while. And then all of a sudden, it's what I think Jim Sinclair used to call it a magnet or something,
Yeah.
where there's basically a big sucking up of the next level. And if there's no resistance between 34 and 50 in US dollar terms, you could get there fairly quickly. Will you? I don't know. I said that on the recent interview with Greg Hunter.
Yeah.
I think that silver, since it's so necessary or essential, that more and more nation states will come to the realization, let alone industrial users, that if they don't have silver, they're out of business. And, you know, that could be an Elon Musk. I mean, the letter I wrote, that open letter to Elon Musk, you can look it up on the web, was really not to get him to buy silver. It was just to put into consciousness of people that follow what he does is if you don't have silver, forget SpaceX, forget Tesla. You don't have a business, sir.
Yeah.
And think about it. I think that you're going to see a run to silver that will surmount gold because one, it's more affordable. Two, it's been suppressed for so long. And three, it's one area that the bankers have little control over. They still basically control the gold. I mean, the idea is he who owns the gold makes the rules. Well, maybe that was true in the 30s when we were on a gold backed standard, but we're really, as David Webb points out, on a securities backed standard. In other words, corporations, all of the S&P 500s, what really backs the currency.
Right.
So now what backs, let's say, the world economy? Well, I've said it 100 times, oil. But what backs it more, you know, almost as much as oil is silver. So if you wanted to not be able to stack oil, which is pretty tough to do, the best substitute and the best correlation you can get silver.
Mhm.
So if you dig into the oil argument that I've given throughout this interview, and you're sort of neutral on silver, you might want to rethink it
Right.
because silver is an energy equivalent to oil and they do track together fairly well, especially in what I call the latter days where you can't get it. I mean, you could be in a position where, as Mike Maloney talks, it's unobtainium
Right.
because everyone that's held it at 30 and suffered, and now it's at 35. You think they're going to buy it at 30 and sell it at 35, Jean-Claude? Are you
No way.
kidding me?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a great hoarding, and it's going to be hard to unravel it. Now, if you don't want to unravel it for food, land, um, a hotel at 10 cents on the dollar, all those things will take place.
Mhm.
But as far as getting it easily even I'd say from the $35 mark to the $50 mark, yeah, there'll be some that take advantage of it, and some in the futures market for sure because they're playing with paper,
Right.
but they're also playing with fire because you can't put a futures contract into a solar panel. It just doesn't work.
And not
So
just that, when all this goes, I mean, they're basically playing musical chairs, maybe 500 to 1 in terms of paper silver to actual physical silver backing up the whole scheme.
So I'm still bullish on it. I think the one thing where maybe I've made a mistake and it wasn't intentional was what's the right amount?
Mhm.
Because there isn't a right amount for everybody. I'm overweighted silver, always have been, but I've got
Right.
ice water in my veins and I have other assets and I just think it's the best thing going, especially for a legacy investment for my children's children.
Mhm.
But you don't need a lot of it to hedge. And that's the whole idea of a hedge is that you buy an insurance policy. I mean, when you buy, a fire insurance for your home, I mean, you don't like writing the check, but once you wrote it and put it in the mail, you really don't think about it very much.
Right.
You sleep well at night. If the unlikely event that your house burns down, you're covered unless you're underinsured. And there's the right amount. This is the approach most people should use. The
Yeah.
problem is that we've got a lot of good educators out there, such as yourself and Bix and Cliff and Andy Scheckman and name it, name it, name it. And people realize, oh my God, we've been living this scam. I mean, this David Morgan character makes sense. All fiat fails, 3 words, and that they're running a lie. They're
Right.
telling you get something for nothing. These bastard bankers print up stuff with a click of a mouse and are able to spend it. So
When I
once they
figured
get
that out the first time, I sold my Harley Davidson that was sitting in the garage because I was like, "Look at all that money sitting there, and if I'm totally exposed to this Ponzi scheme. What have I done to protect my family?" So I sold my bike. I still have the box of silver that I traded that bike for, and yes, it was like a painful thing to do, but at the same time, it was the insurance that I never had at that time, and that from then on, I kept adding to that, and I felt a lot better. Speaking about silver and the choices of silver, you said that you're a little bit overweight here in your ratios. We can maybe get that. People can watch our previous episodes to look at the percentage split between silver, gold, and perhaps some crypto. But in terms of silver itself, right now Andy has these 90% constitutional silver on sale for $3 over spot. He's got the bigger 100-ounce bars also here at 145 over spot. You guys can find that at johnmystic.net .net/silver. If you guys fill out that form, Andy will get those out to you. What would you suggest for a person who's just getting into silver? Are they looking to bulk up
absolutely,
now?
it's a lead pipe cinch. I think Bill Holter says the same thing. If you can get the lowest denomination silver possible, which means constitutional silver. A bag of dimes is a good start. And once you have, if you're wealthy, a bag of silver per, person in the household is plenty.
Mhm.
If you're not so well off, a half a bag would probably do you well for a family of four or whatever. Let me just back up here for a second and
Yep.
pull out my, if I can, yeah. It's got another label on it, so I'll just hold the bag. I won't put it where I bought it from. But that's $100 in dimes.
Yeah.
But what's it cost in fiat? 2,500.
Yeah.
So 25 times. So people say, well, silver's never gone anywhere. It's never done anything and blah, blah, blah. And I get it. I know people are upset with me. They're upset with the silver price, they're upset with the suppression. It should be 600 and all those things. Believe me, I live it every day.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that $100 is the equivalent of 2,500 today.
Yeah.
That's the truth. So Has
Yeah.
it done its job? Well, you make up your own damn mind whether it has or it hasn't. But still, that's not a real big pouch of silver, really. But yet, it costs as much as that crazy thing cost.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. So, folks, again, beyondmystic.net/silver. Fill out the form there, and Andy will get back to you and get this into your own possession here at the best possible prices. I think I have really good prices there. Dave, I wanted to ask you about gold. So, you just mentioned a couple of minutes ago that they still kind of have gold under control. Something weird happened a week ago, and you also said, "Yeah, you can say that again. This has been a very extraordinary day in gold. Look at that spike there, and of course, the suppressors were back in on the Monday morning. Nonetheless, what do you think was happening here?
I
Is there
can tell you what happened. I
Go
mean,
ahead.
I've seen it so often in the silver market. When the managers are losing the game, they'll let the expression, let the horse run, let the bit run, just give it a free rein and let it go as fast as it can.
Right.
So they'll do that and it'll get a spike high like we see, and then it'll exhaust on its own, just like throwing the ball up into the air. So they let the market tell them where it's going to exhaust, which was at what, 2140 something.
Yep.
And then once that's in there, especially if it's in the aftermarket or the overseas market, now they can double fist it and just sell it short like, heck won't have it.
Right.
And that will drive it down, 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 down. So you see that much more often in the silver market than the gold market, but it's the same technique. I was
Right.
asked to write an article for Futures Magazine years ago, and a lot of this stuff that's mainstream, they really don't want me doing it because I'm an advocate for silver as money.
Yeah.
And most of their paid analysts are silver's an industrial metal, and that's as far as it goes. But since I've always taken the silver as the poor man's gold, it's money, it's better money than gold for these reasons. I usually don't get mainstream, recognition. I do, I've been on mainstream TV, blah, blah, blah. So that's what happened. The managers saw they needed a way out. How do you let it exhaust? Once it exhausts, then we're going to take advantage of it. We're going to bring it right back down. Bob Coleman actually put out some information that the ETFs, I believe, had gone 4 or 5 times their normal short position before that happened. But hey, no one knows the future, right?
Wow. Is it possible that somebody's front running or okay, so let's just go back to this event that Cliff is talking about. He originally predicted this before the October 7. He talked about hitting the 81 on the emotional value of his system reporting. I believe September 11, it was an emotional value of 6. So we were 13 or 16 times higher for this event that was about to pop. This was early in the fall, before this thing in Israel with Palestine. And when that happened, I think we brought us up to, I think it was 28% or 28 was the number. And now we're sitting at 40 something. So just under 50. So we're 2/3 of the way to that 81. And in one of his last emails, he talked about something popping off maybe as soon as December 22nd or 23rd. He talked about 3 words being associated to it in the data. There was panic, spook, and I think it was crisis was the other word. So bear with me if I got that wrong. All of this suggesting that it has something to do with the economic system. So the spoof was interesting, or the spook was interesting, suggesting that it could be a scare in the terms of the word spook, but it could also be attached somehow to intelligence agencies. Is there a fight right now happening behind the scenes on top of seeing these games, as you said, in the silver market, where they have these little runoffs to let off steam? Was there perhaps some spook activities here, some codes being played out, or people maybe running ahead of this event that could be happening just around the corner here on December 22nd or 3rd, where people were trying to play the market here ahead of time? Do you see the potential for that? Does that make any sense with anything else that you're hearing, maybe offhand from your customer base?
It does somewhat. I say somewhat because the gold doesn't play the role now that it played in, when I was, more your age. I mean, when I was age 20 to, well, peaked when I was 27. So, gold had a role because it had only been clipped from 1971 and now to 1979. So we're only looking like 8 or 9 years past the time it was closed.
Yeah.
And gold was allowed to be owned from 72, I believe, on.
Yeah.
So it was really close to the closure of the gold window. So most people that were sophisticated understood the meaning of gold and why it was important, and silver as well. But
Yeah.
now we've gone another 50 years or so, and most people have been brainwashed into thinking, well, they don't have as much, validity in the financial system, and really they don't.
They're just pet rocks, don't you know?
Yeah, don't we know? So I think the Fed certainly puts their thumb on the scale, as you said,
Yeah.
but I don't think it is as much import as it had back in the last bull market. It could, however, because what have we seen? We've seen the run to gold. What is it? It's the central banks buying gold. Why? Because they're scared
Yeah.
and they know they need a money of last resort. And if all else fails for them, there's gold. If
Hmm.
all else fails for us, there's silver.
Hmm.
So silver will be used in more transactions because gold will have too high a unit value. So
Hmm.
that's why most people should have some constitutional silver to start off with at least.
Hmm.
But as far as the overall control, again, it comes back to oil and really the brainwashing of we know more than you know. You can't fend for yourself. You can't band together and have flea markets and open air farmers markets. You need us in order to eat. And that may not be true. In some cases, it will be. I mean, you go to the inner city, you're not going to grow a lot of vegetables on, in your apartment building. But they're people are more resilient than they think. Let me just give you a real quick example.
Okay.
When Russia failed, North Korea was totally dependent on Russia for food. And plus, you don't have much agriculture in North Korea because of the weather conditions. But in Cuba, who was also under the Soviet umbrella, the Soviets, or excuse me, the Cuban leadership said, well, this land is your land, right? Everyone owns everything. And go out and grow all the food that you can. So the Cubans went out and started growing food. 4 years later, they had more nutrition and were healthier than they'd ever been.
Yeah.
So, of course, they had growing conditions. So you got to factor that into your thinking. But nonetheless, people will adapt and adapt pretty quickly, especially under dire circumstances. I mean, we were talking off air when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Yeah.
And, easy times we're going to, get of bread easy, wimps. But as things get harder and harder, you'll get tougher and tougher.
Yeah.
And that was just a natural order of things. So,
Mentioning how Cuba, the farming transformation they did too, they're also ahead of the curve now with farming in the inner cities. There was a project I watched maybe 2 3 years ago. They have these community gardens where even in the most densely like cement ridden populations, they have these community gardens. And again, they're overflowing with food. So, as you say, humans are very adaptable. Let's get into the last segment here about CBDCs. Again, this is maybe a shunt and a valve, an escape valve for some of the money trapped into the system here, into this burning barn, so to speak. The IMF just released this digital currency handbook for the world's central bank. We've seen legislation around the world here. We've seen a lot of tests of CBDCs. This is the direction they want to go. It appears that they wanted to go there through the means of something that was happening in the last 2 3 years and some of the paperwork attached to that and the passports. We won't get into that. But at any rate, we are here now, and it is one of the options that could be presented to us here, as Bill Sinclair says here, in a series of 1, 2, or 3, perhaps resets here as we move forward. What's your take on crypto and your understanding between the decentralized crypto versus this centralized version of cryptocurrencies? How do people navigate that, if at all? What's your opinion?
well, my stance has always been that, wanting to take the money power away from the money powers and put it back in the hands of the people.
Yeah.
So before there was cryptocurrencies, there was physical gold and silver coins, and you didn't need to put your life savings in there. You needed what, we often call an insurance position, and you could sleep at night and just go about normal stock and real estate investing or whatever floated your boat. Now that we've been able to have another asset class, then that's run by the people in some cases, then I'm all for it. Anything that mitigates the control mechanism into the hands of the people, I'm for. The problem I have with most of cryptos is that A lot of them are nothing more than an electronic fiat. In other words, there's nothing really behind them. Now, do you have to have an asset-backed digital currency? No, but it's certainly the preferred because a gold or silver-backed crypto is superior to an unbacked. But it doesn't have to be gold or silver. It could be cobalt. It could be oil. It could be real estate. It could be
Mhm.
lumber. It could be software for the Tether program that Vix has talked about for so long. It could be a lot of things. So it doesn't necessarily have to be gold or silver, but I think that anything that's tangible is far superior to anything that's just an idea. And so that is probably my main takeaway on crypto. I
Okay.
was neutral on Bitcoin right from the start, and I still am, but I'm free market. If you think Bitcoin is the absolute gold 2.0, just drop a Bitcoin in my hand. It's as good as gold, and I'll agree with you. I haven't seen that happen yet. But regardless of my
Max Kaiser didn't offer you 10,000 Bitcoin at some point, like he did Alex Jones. Come on, man.
it did not.
Max Kaiser, come on the show. Give us some Bitcoin.
So
Sorry.
So we'll see how this plays out. But in Crypto Conspiracy Series, I did a year and a half ago, I talk about my thoughts on Bitcoin. I wrote a paper called "My Two Bits About Bitcoin." You can look it up on the web.
Yeah.
I said, regardless of how this thing started, that if it really does pose something that the authority figures don't like, they'll take it over. And Bitcoin has been taken over basically by the Mastercard. So unfortunately, instead of being the people's money again, it's mostly taken over by the heavily well-heeled banking sector, and that's unfortunate because it might have been different, but it isn't. And but there are coins out there, especially these privacy coins like Monero and some of the pirate coins and that type of thing. I think that have merit. So I'm favorable to the idea of having multiple ways to put real assets into your own hands and circumvent the current system. I'm all for that. You
No.
have to make up your own damn mind of which suits you best. I like asset bets back digital currencies, but I also tell everyone that follows me it's a tool. So if you have the tool of your phone like Apple Pay, I mean, I've got a Starbucks account. I don't even like to admit it. I don't do $6 very often, but I'm in the airport and that seems to be the only thing there. I'm gonna get a coffee, a tea, or whatever. And I've got the app and I don't have to worry about exchange controls or anything else. So I've got it.
Right.
But do I put my life savings on the Starbucks? Are you kidding me? It's a tool so I can go through the line faster. They got $50 on it or something. So I look at the same thing with some of these cryptos for my own personal take. You asked me what I thought about
Yeah.
I mean, there's people that think that they should put all their money into Bitcoin and call them maxis, and you can circumvent borders, and no one knows you've got it. And you got your 12 seed words memorized, and on and on. Good for them. I'm not against that.
Yeah.
I find it to be a fool's errand in a way because of the cyber attacks I see coming in the future, and also this rhetoric going around about terrorism and use of energy. I mean, and I don't think, I'm not saying anything against Cliff. I mean, I highly admire him. My point isn't that I differ with Cliff. My point is I just believe probably more than he does that the political class still has a lot of clout, and you get these yo-yos out there like Pocahontas saying that we've got to take out Bitcoin because it's using so much energy. Has nothing to do with the facts.
No.
I'm not saying it's factual. All I'm saying is that the political class is so ignorant, and there's so many of their followers that have been so damn brainwashed that they might have the political clout to shut it down or mitigate it. That's what I'm
Right.
saying. So I hope
Well,
I'm
you have a
crystal
point.
clear on that.
So there's the misunderstanding there, as you said, in terms of energy requirements, but there's also the idea of the network of networks. If these guys collude together to own the network of networks, whether you have Bitcoin, Litecoin, or a CBDC, if they tax you to be on the network to exchange that for other goods and services, they still control to some extent the value of your crypto and your ability to perhaps trade it. That's the war we're fighting. Although we might see the advent of new technologies like quantum swaps, people who can transfer peer to peer without any of these networks. We'll see moving on. Where what's that term? Necessity is the
Mother of invention.
exactly. Well said.
Did you see? Was it the Mr. Robot? Did you see that series by chance?
No.
Well, you want to look it up. I don't want to digress too far, but one of my daughters told me about it. But it has to do with cryptocurrencies. And at the end of the movie, basically, they spin all this money or crypto through the spinner so no one can trace where it came from. And they load up everybody's wallet. So the people get all the money and they steal it from the bankers. It's a beautiful ending.
It's a perfect Robin Hood story adaptation of our times. Guys, my two bits about Bitcoin. I just put the link in the live chat there if you guys want to read it. This is from 2014. Has your views changed a little bit on that, or you're still pretty much on that
Hardly
same
at
page?
all. No,
Okay.
hardly at all. I mean, at the end of it, I talked to Richard Grove, and he had some ideas about it being started by the NSA. We do know some of the algorithms are from the NSA. So I don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. I doubt it's an individual. I think it's more than one person. I'm
Mhm.
familiar with most of the arguments. I had Kurt Wuckert on my crypto conspiracy series twice. He's an archivist for Bitcoin. He probably knows as much as anybody about it. He
Right.
agreed that MasterCard had taken it over. He also agreed it had been basically, I'll use the word bastardized from what its original intent was. Again, if you're a maxi, go for it. I'm not going to tell you no. I'm free market. If that's what you think is the best way to maintain or preserve or build wealth, then fine. I don't, but that doesn't make me right. But it doesn't make you right either.
No, no, exactly.
We've yet to take out the old high of what 67,000, and we did call the top there, by the way. I
Yeah.
called the top, and everyone else is saying it's 125,000, 125,000, 125,000. I said we're halfway there, and it's coming down, and it did.
Yeah, no, you were right on that one, and you also predicted the right top there. Even though at that time Max Kaiser was calling for 400k Bitcoin. So I digress. But there's also this Webbot data of the 100k parties for Bitcoin still in one of the data sets. Who knows? We might see a run up here to 50, then a pullback to 38. That's what some of the guys were talking about right now. Who knows where things are going to go? But that's within a system that seems to work. Although when we have a crash or a panic, as Cliff was suggesting, maybe all bets are off here as to where anything goes, whether that's Bitcoin
Yeah,
or
let's look at that real quickly because a lot of people really don't understand markets. So
yeah.
let's, for example, say that it goes to 50, Bitcoin goes to 50 and it comes back to 35, and then it goes to 100. So it's roughly 33 times 3 is 100,000 round numbers. So it's gone up threefold.
Mm.
So that's a 300% gain. But those, I think, are the kind of gains you're looking at for Bitcoin going forward versus, say, silver could go from 25 to 75. So you might have the same risk reward profile as silver that you have for Bitcoin going forward. Now, does Bitcoin go to 2 million per coin or 5 million or what some of these astronomical numbers are? I don't know. I somewhat doubt it. I mean, we could get to $1 million Bitcoin, but it costs you 287 bucks for a slice of bread. I mean, it's all relative. You got to look at not so much what is the number, but what is the value? What does that Bitcoin actually buy you? What does an ounce of gold actually buy you?
Hmm.
And this is what you really need to keep in mind because a number is just a number. I
Hmm.
mean, I've got these, $100 trillion bills I still give out from time to time,
Well,
to
that was the thing. I think we were talking about this, you and I, the last time you were on.
yeah.
We could see $200,000 Bitcoin, but maybe that's in a hyperinflated currency where actually in nominal value it's worth less than it is today at 38 or 40,000 Bitcoin.
Well,
Yeah.
most people don't know. So I gave one of these to my mother-in-law, and she looked at it and saw the number 100 trillion, and she goes, "Oh, if only it were real." And I said, "It is real."
Yeah.
And it just went right over her head. She didn't understand because we're all taught that a big number has it's a lot. It
Right.
means something.
Yeah.
This was printed in Germany and it never hit circulation.
Yeah.
The previous printing was $50 trillion, and it was in circulation. I think it bought a Coke, if I remember right.
Yeah.
But but it was by the time the currency had ultimately failed, gone to zero, as you said, this never made it to the market. That's why what you find is are always really crispy critters because they never hit circulation.
Wow. Well, thank you for that piece of history. Thank you so much, Dave. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. If you're interested about all of these conversations about the economy, I have a new series coming up here. Marty Hibbs will be on Beyond the Charts here on Tuesday, December 12th at 1 p.m. That's tomorrow, yes. And then tomorrow night, I'm going to have Litecoin Lisa with Jason at 4 join me for the Beyond Crypto Roundtable. I'm rebooting the series here. More and more people now putting more interest into crypto and perhaps diversifying outside of this casino. So if you're interested in that, that's going to be December 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to have Andy back on also here now for some new weekly updates here entitled Beyond the Vault. This one is starting on December 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern. In the meantime, of course, you can find David's work here at themorganreport.com. David, for the people who want to follow this a little bit more, get into gold and silver in a more deep way here in your financial analyses of things, what do you have that's for free here on the Morgan Report, and what do you have in terms of paid subscription here, and what can people expect here when they subscribe to the Morgan Report?
Well, first of all, if you scroll down, there's a free e-letter I put out for years, and that's just put a first name and an email, and then it will give you an opt-in. So it's a double opt-in process, and that goes out usually 3 or 4 times a week. There's a paid service. You can scroll back up. There's a subscribe button, and it talks about what you get for your subscription. But really, the best thing for free is just go to the middle there where it says blog, hit the blog tab, and then pull down. And in the blog, you've got a search menu over on the right-hand side. So if you type in crypto or crypto conspiracy right there, it'll bring up the 30 interviews I've done, and I'll sort them for you. So just hit that. So there's the 30th, 29th. I would suggest you go 1 through 4 and 14. That'll
Okay.
give you a pretty good insight into the other side of the coin that very few people will talk about.
Very cool.
And I think it's important if you're going to invest, let's say, a substantial amount in Bitcoin. This, I don't know if it's late to the party or not. It's certainly a mature market. It's not like it was when it was 2 cents. I mean, I was one of the first tipped off on Bitcoin. Robert Prechter wrote about it. I had it on my desk for 6 months. I finally threw it away. I was curious, but just never took the time. I had the ability to buy it, but it's probably under a buck. And knowing me, I had my risk tolerance. I probably would have bought $500 or $1,000 worth just to see what the hell it was. I did the math one time. I think it came out like 100 million or something.
Oh my God.
But I never did it. Opportunities gone by. But nonetheless, there's a lot of information there that I've given for free. My main purpose has been to educate as many people as possible to understand the benefits of an honest monetary system. That really helps everyone from the poorest on up. And this is the only way to have a level playing field for everyone, at least so far. And one more thing, and I'll let you go or let me go. And that's, I do not look at the precious metals as being an end anymore. I look at it as being a means to transition to the next level. I think what we need to do is get a higher consciousness, a more spiritual attitude, and we have to understand what we're really all about and maybe get the, let's call it free energy paradigm going where everyone has enough energy and they're not charged for it. Sort of the Tesla model, Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
And if we were able to do that, think of how much food you could grow. And this is my goal. So I think honesty and trust is needed for the system to function well again, but it may not rely on honest money. We might be able to get to that consciousness level where we all have enough. And we come from a position of abundance, not scarcity, where we all know that we have all we need and will ever need. And that way, this idea of not ever getting enough, which is a scarcity mentality, leaves everyone. So that would be my ultimate long-term goal, is that we transition from where we are now in this bastardized system run by the ruling control freaks into where we mitigate the problem with our own labor for real something. And then we move out of that into the next paradigm where everyone lives in a situation of abundance. That's my big picture.
Well, I love it, David, and you're doing great work because one of the ways to get out of this scarcity programming is doing exactly what you've been doing, sharing all of this information. You were a big part in my waking up process here, understanding the world around us and where we're going. And still to this day, I see by reading the comments of Trisha, this was amazeballs. Great discussion, information, and it was so easy to follow and understand. Well, Trisha, I appreciate that. And please do forward these videos to your friends and family so they too can understand what's happening here and get out of that scarcity mindset and perhaps create this better world here of abundance for all, as David was just opining right there. So thank you so much, David. I really appreciate all of your time here today. Really good interview. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This was Silver When the Banks Fail with Mr. David Morgan. And again, you can find his work at themorganreport.com. I'm Jean-Claude. I'm Beyond Mystic. I love you guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Au revoir.